All right. Why don't we get started? Thanks everyone for joining today. This is our pricing webinar, how to price your home and sell yourself for maximum value. I'm Jeff. Alan's with me as well. We're going to be guiding you through the presentation today. Alan, maybe we'll just start with just a really quick introduction of yourself, and then I'll go, and then we'll get rolling.
Sounds good. So yeah, I'm Alan Kelly. I'm one of the founders of Bōde and the Chief Revenue Officer here. My background is in tech. My last role was with a company called King, or the makers of Candy Crush, where I was in charge of growth and pricing. And before that, I spent 8 years in consulting, largely helping companies with their pricing. So I spent a lot of time and a lot of years thinking about pricing, and I guess excited to talk to everyone on here about pricing homes.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So I know some of our registrants have been on previous webinars, but quick intro, I'm Jeff. Started in real estate about 15 years ago in commercial real estate here in Calgary. Moved over and started a brokerage in 2010 and kind of grew disenchanted with the industry and its lack of call it evolution over the last few years. So one of the founders of Bōde and really excited about what we're offering both sellers and buyers in trying to modernize the real estate transaction.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we'll get started today. Alan's going to take you through a bit of the theory and pricing methodologies.
Sounds great. Let's jump into the next slide. So I suppose to kick off is, why do you need to start? Why is it so important to start with the right price? And there's a shocking statistic that I think most people don't know about what percentage of homes that get listed ultimately sell. And that is only about half of all homes that are listed sell within the first 6 months. I don't think a lot of people realize that. I think people generally think that once a home's listed, in most cases, 90% of the time that home ultimately sells. But if you look across all of Canada, the average is about the same. That's about half of all homes listed don't ultimately sell in the first 6 months. So what's the big reason for that? And the number one reason is overpricing. So really, it's so important to set the right list price to try and avoid this overpricing trap. So how this works is you have a feeling for what the market value of your home might be, but you're optimistic and you think maybe if you set a high list price, that'll help you negotiate and ultimately land on what the market price will be. So you start high, but what happens when you start high is that your home becomes relatively less attractive to buyers versus all the other homes that they're looking at. So you set your high list price, but then no offers come in. So you sit and wait. And while you're waiting, your overpriced home is helping to sell the other homes that are for sale around you, making them look like better value versus yours. So you're waiting and you're waiting, and eventually you give in and you make a small price reduction. So that's what you see here labeled number 4. So you make a small price reduction, but you wait again and it does nothing. So you end up reducing again and again and again until eventually you're down to market value, so number 5. But the problem is now you're at market value, but you've been listed for so long that buyers in the market they've seen your home already. They've seen it at a high price. Maybe new buyers to the market are now seeing your home for the first time, but they're asking themselves, well, why has it been on the market so long? So, is there something wrong with this property? They've lost confidence that your home is a good buy. And so they still don't make an offer, even though you're now priced very fairly at market value. So ultimately, to try and generate an offer, you end up at number 7 here, having to reduce your price below market value to try and counteract this negative stigma that your home now has for being on the market for so long. So you end up selling actually below market value. So as counterintuitive as that might seem, pricing high above market value tends to lead people to sell at lower prices than they could have otherwise. So what you really want to do is avoid this trap, avoid underselling your home, and try and start off with your list price as close to market value as you possibly can. And market value, of course, it's not really a single price, right? It's a little bit more of a range than one specific number. But it's always best to try and start by listing your home at about the right price. So we can go on to the next slide. So in terms of the big things to think about when trying to set your list price, so what are the things that determine what your house is worth? Well, ultimately, your house is worth whatever a serious buyer is willing to pay for it. And I think a lot of times, when people go to sell their homes, they get a lot of different opinions from a lot of different people about what their home might be worth. They might have friends and family members who have an idea. You'll have your own idea, of course. You might have had some realtors over who would have a view of what your home might be worth. But ultimately, your house is worth whatever a buyer is willing to pay for it. And how do buyers decide what they're willing to pay? Well, it comes down to two things, really. It's by comparing your home to other homes that are for sale right now. So effectively, what else could they buy instead of your home? And the other homes that have recently sold. And so looking at, in your area, what else is sold, that helps them feel like they're not overspending in order to buy your home. So effectively, buying a home is a massive comparison shopping exercise. And in order to set a good price, you really have to put yourself into a buyer's shoes and take a look at the market as if you were a buyer again and you had the same options, the same available homes to choose from on the market, and you had the same data about the prices that similar homes had recently sold for. So setting your price is really all about stepping into the buyer's shoes and looking at your home through a buyer's eyes. And so on the next slide, we talk a little bit about the major factors that determine your home's value. So the biggest one, and these are in order of importance, the biggest one, of course, is location. No surprises there. Obviously, homes in better locations are going to be higher valued than others. The second biggest one is type and style. So by type, we mean, is it a detached home, an attached home, or an apartment? And style would be, okay, if it's a detached home, is it a bungalow, or is it a 2-story or a 3-story? Then, of course, size is the next biggest determinant of value. And between those three, that really makes up the biggest part of what your home's worth: location, type and style, and size. And then condition and amenities. So condition being, is your home in good shape? Does it need to be renovated? Does it need new paint? And amenities of, do you have parking, double attached garage, or a detached garage? Those are actually more partly related to your home's value, but also very much related to just the saleability of your home. So if you have someone choosing between your home and another similar home, but yours has a double attached garage, well, that actually makes yours more saleable in that scenario. Similarly, if yours is just freshly painted, is it more valuable? Not hugely, but it does make it more saleable. And when buyers choosing between two properties, now yours looks more favorable. Anything else to add there, Jeff?
No, I think that was great. I think that's a good point. Just your point about condition and amenities really probably influencing buyers to choose your home over the competition, but not necessarily adding additional value. Things like small things like heated tile in a master ensuite. That might influence a buyer's decision to choose your home over the competition, but you're not really going to say, well, I'm going to price $5,000 more because of this heated tile. It's not a major determinant of value.
Exactly.
So yeah, you've alluded a little bit to this, but the different opinions of value. So we put together this chart just showing, often the bias is that a seller has a higher opinion of value than a buyer does, and the appraisal is probably the thing that's closest to market value. And I think it's important to remember that this is a really inherent bias, right? As homeowners, we do think that our home is valued higher than what market value is. And it makes total sense if you think about it, because we ultimately bought the home. So at one point in time, we valued that home greater than any other buyer in the market. So it only makes sense that when years later we go to sell it, we might have a bit of a bias towards a higher value. So that's really the point we're making on this slide here. So pricing methodologies, I want to chat quickly about 3 different types. I want to get through the theory really quickly, because I think this will all land a lot better once we get into a case study. So the 3 main data sets that we want to look at today, I think 2 everyone on the call will probably be very familiar with, and 1 might be a bit of a new concept. So we'll start with that one. It's the HPI index, so the home price index, which is published by CREA, or the Canadian Real Estate Association. So this started back in 2005, and I actually have a chart of data to show to everyone as well. It incorporates over 15 years of data, and it's published every month for 65 local markets across Canada. So all the urban centers receive this data. It's more technical than average sale prices. What CREA does is they use what they call a benchmark or typical home. So not knowing exactly what that is for Calgary, we might say the typical home in Calgary has 2.3 bedrooms and 2.8 bathrooms and is 1,800 square feet with double detached parking. So that's the typical home, and now that's where they derive all of their statistics. So it looks daunting, but it really isn't. So this is, and anyone can retrieve this. You simply Google CREA HPI, and this data is publicly available. This is not an agent tool. You don't need to be licensed to get this information. You can simply download it. You're given the option of choosing either seasonally adjusted numbers, which is the one I've chosen here, or non-seasonally adjusted numbers. So as
maybe you want to zoom in just a little bit more there, Jeff. Hard
sounds good. I'm working on 2 27-inch monitors, so I understand not everyone is is working on the same. Hopefully that looks a little bit better.
Perfect.
Cool. So as I mentioned, this initiative started 15 years ago in January 2005, and the Canadian Real Estate Association at that time just said, okay, across all markets, everyone is assigned a score of 100, and that is their index. So one error that I make often, and just make sure that you do look at if you do download this spreadsheet, is to click along the bottom. So here you can choose all of the markets. You can see here Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatchewan, Regina. Just make sure you're on the appropriate tab. Otherwise, the data is going to be very skewed, as you can imagine. I mean, have a look at the Greater Vancouver tab, and you can see exactly what that market has done over the last 15 years. So understanding not everyone is probably as fascinated about this as I am, but it is interesting data to look at. So across the top, you can see composite, single family, and then they even break it down into bungalows and 2-story homes. And then, of course, attached product and apartment product. So looking at the data, we can see, I've just highlighted a few points that are kind of interesting. So June 2007, kind of the fall of 2007, we had a really strong market. And I remember selling at this time. It was, it's a bit like what we're experiencing right now. There was lots of multiple offers, competing bids, over list price type deals. Going forward, we can see that it was a bit of a slump. If you recall what happened in 2008, that was the subprime mortgage crisis in the US. So, we really lost a lot of ground here. We were sitting at about, the high 180s. And then fast forward to 2009, we were back down to about 158. Again, moving forward, if you recall kind of the summer of 2014, we were all paying about $1.40 a liter at the pumps. A price of WTI oil was about $110 at this time. And you can see for the first time here, we breached 200. So this was kind of a peak in the market, which is really great if you sold into this market. Unfortunately, if you bought in really any month of 2014, upgrades aside, there'd be very little upside given where we're currently at the market. So, we flirted with this 200 number a lot over the last 5 years, and we're almost back to that level. We're If we look at March 2021 on the composite, we're at about 195. So we're almost back to, based on this index, we're almost back to 2014 pricing, at least as a whole. You know, that you really want to look at this for your specific product type. You know, if it's an apartment, it will have performed very different from a two-story detached house. So if you look here, I've also highlighted just a couple numbers, and these will make sense as I flip back to the presentation. So I just want to show you here, March 2020, in the bungalow column, we can see that the index was 189.7. If we look back at that same column in May 2011, the number was 163.3. So that'll make sense on the next slide. So this is, for those that were on the last webinar, we used this example before. This is a home that I purchased in May 2011 for $610,000. And at that time, the home price index for bungalows was about 163. I sold this property last year at 740 when the home price index was 189.7. So this is really putting the, you know, making the HPI applicable to your particular property. So here we can see that the home price index during those 9 years went up about 16%. So is it perfect? No. I mean, the house didn't sell for exactly 16.2% more than what I paid for it 9 years ago, but it's a pretty good proxy. I think it was within, you know, I think that those numbers work out to about 705 or 710. So, you know, you really want to use all these pricing methodologies, the HPI index, previously sold homes, and your active competition to really triangulate and determine market value. You know, taking any one of those things on its own is not the best strategy. You really want to triangulate.
The other thing I noticed is you had much better pictures when you sold, huh?
Well, everyone had better pictures then. Like the photography in 2011 was just horrible. That resolution is probably 60 dots per inch. But yeah, photography's come a long way. So I just want to chat quickly about the comparative market analysis. So this is not to be confused with an appraisal. So an appraisal is conducted by someone who's licensed under the Real Estate Act to provide a single number. So let's use that example of that home that we just looked at. An appraiser would come in and say, okay, that home's value is $725,000. It's a single data point, and appraisers are trained and experienced in providing that value. The CMA is a little bit different. This is the thing that real estate agents are taught how to do, and it provides a range of value. So if we were to do a CMA on that previous property, you know, an agent might come in and say, well, the range of prices is 710 to 760. And what I really want to show you is how you can create your own CMA using our free data tools at Bōde. So we'll jump into that now. I'm just going to get out of the presentation and over to my other screen. And I want to thank everyone for sending in addresses as part of the registration process. We got a ton of addresses. We could only choose one, so we somewhat randomly chose one address. For someone that I hope is on the call, the address we chose was 110 Woodbrook Road. And so what we want to do is take the technical aspects and the pricing methodology and show you how you would actually apply it in your own scenario. Before we do that, I'm going to show you really quickly just how easy it is to list your home with Bōde. So simply click on the sell button, sell your home, and scroll down to the address field. So here, again, as I mentioned, the address that we chose was 110 Woodbrook. Google will predict the address. So here we have it, 110 Woodbrook Road Southwest, and then you hit get started. Now, we take you through the entire process. If you ever have a question, you can call, text, there's a bot. We're always available to help with any of this information. As soon as you click that get started button, it's going to alert our support and success team that you have started listing, and we're going to be there to support you through that process. So as part of that, we will provide to you, usually within about 12 to 24 hours, any MLS history that your property may have had. So for the subject property, again, sorry, I'll make that a little bigger. It actually hasn't had much for MLS history. The last time it sold, I believe, was 1997. So we will provide this data, but it's, it's pretty outdated. A lot of the sellers tell us that they like receiving this because, maybe they want to verify that, yes, it is a clay tile roof, or, they might want to borrow some brilliance of the public remarks and, maybe gather some inspiration as they write their own MLS description. So you can expect to receive this. The other thing that we provide is kind of a City of Calgary map report. This gives you a lot of the legal information, general size, the last time that the property sold. So again, we can see that it sold for $220,000 in April 1997. And you can see the assessed value history. So the most recent tax assessed value of $517,500. Just for everyone's reference, this is the home that we are looking at today. So it's a detached 2-story home. This is just a Google Street View with a double attached garage in the community of Woodbine.
Jeff, maybe since you just touched on the tax assessed values, maybe give us your thoughts on using tax assessed values as a guide to pricing your home.
Yeah, it's not a bad starting point, right? If you're literally, it's a shot in the dark, the tax assessed value might be a good place to start. I've seen properties sell for literally $1 million off the tax assessed value. There was one in Upper Mount Royal a few years ago in Hillcrest and sold for $1.5 million, and the tax assessed was something like 2.55. So on a percentage basis, way off. There are years that I find City of Calgary, at least, less familiar with City of Edmonton, but there are years where sold prices are actually pretty accurate, especially for certain property types. Other years, they might be consistently low. Maybe across the board, we look at the data and every home is selling for, 5.5% to 7.5% lower than tax assessed value. And then, of course, the opposite can happen too, where, everything is consistently selling for 10% higher. You have to think that those values are kind of conducted in arrears, and going forward, a lot can happen, and a lot has happened, especially in the Alberta detached market amidst the rebound from the COVID pandemic that hit last year.
Yeah, I like it. It's basically it's another data point here for you to use to try and triangulate your home's value, but probably not one to rely on very much.
Yeah, not one to rely on, and not one that really stands up in a negotiation, right? So as you're doing this data research and comparative market analysis, what you really want to keep in mind is you want your list price to be defensible, right? If anytime a buyer comes to you, and if you can defend it and say, well, the reason that we're listed at $519,900 is because of XYZ, and that might be Korea HPI data. It's more than likely should really include recently sold listings as well. So always keeping that in mind, that you really want to be able to defend your position when it comes to negotiating. So jumping into the tools, there's really 3 that I want to show everyone on the call. The first one we're going to start with is market data. You can access these tools all from the sold data tab. So market data, sold data, and comparables. So it kind of drives me crazy. I watch a lot of BNN and news, and there's often talk about a Canadian real estate market, and I understand that it needs to be talked about in aggregate, but the idea that we have one market in Canada is kind of crazy. I mean, Vancouver and Toronto have performed totally different from Alberta over the last few years, and I'd argue that Calgary and Edmonton are still not one market. Like, you really have to drill down and look at specific not only cities, but also communities. And that's what our site allows you to do. So as mentioned, we were talking about the Woodbine property. So you can put in some details here. We can look at province, City of Calgary, and we can look at 1 year of data. Now, I will only want to look at here data for the community of Woodbine for detached homes. So I simply click that. And most homes in Woodbine are probably built between 1970 and 1990. And of course, the subject property was built, I believe, in 1988. So we're going to also choose year built, so that we're really looking at only the data for relevant property types. So once we have that information, we can look at the sold property trends. and hit generate graph. So here we're looking at number of sales over a 1-year time horizon. So you can see here, April, if we went back one more month, you'd even see March was lower. This, of course, was the beginning of the pandemic. And we had 10 months of supply. Everyone was, rightly so, quite concerned about the economy, their job security, and homes were not selling. That rebounded quite quickly. And, we're back to the last few months, very high number of sales. The other thing that's interesting and is really an inverse to the number of sales is how many days on market is the average home in Woodbine. So if we flip here, click on days on market, and then look at maybe a 5-year time horizon, this is kind of what we would expect to see. If you recall the Korea HPI data, 2017 was a pretty strong year. The average days on market at that time was 34. The last few years, Alberta's been in a bit of an economic slump. Energy prices have not been working in our favor. And so the days on market have increased, 49 in 2018 and 46 in 2019. Last year, much more strength in aggregate in the market, and days on market are about 30. If we look at the actual data now, that number is, I think, is about, for Woodbine, is 14 or 15. So that tells me that if properties are selling with conditions, they're probably selling within the first week, because the buyer will usually have, maybe 7 to 10 business days to complete their due diligence and waive conditions. So they're gonna have that time to do their property inspection and obtain financing.
We can take a quick look at that. If you change the date range there to 1 year,
yeah,
we can have a look what days on market are doing now very recently.
Jeff, would you mind touching a little bit on what days on market actually is? Is that the days until it is firm fixed, or is that the days until someone is conditionally sold?
Yeah, good question. So it's not the time of offer, it's the time that conditions are waived. So we would call it a firm deal at that time. So it's the point at which the buyer has removed, both buyer and seller have removed any conditions to sale. So as you can see here, Woodbine's really low, only 15 days on market. So that tells me that sellers in Woodbine are probably, if they're priced well, they're probably getting an offer in the first week. So these tools are fully available to any of our users. That we just require that you have an account, which is as easy as signing up with an email address. So the next tool I want to show you is something that we call comparables. So what we want to do is give all of our users a really objective, transparent view of what the actual comparables are as it pertains to their subject property. So I've just started filling this out. Here again, we're using that same address, 110 Woodbrook Road Southwest. It's a detached property, 2 stories, built in 1988, 3 beds, 2.5 baths, and 2,100 square feet, give or take. So as soon as we hit apply, what this tool allows our users to do is determine what were the most comparable recently sold listings. So we've got a number here at about 91%. And so what this algorithm does, and thanks to Alan for creating this patent pending algorithm. So what it does is it measures everything that you've told us above and compares it to all the sold properties in the area over the last 10 years. So we can see that this home at 319 Woodbrook Mews is only 100 meters away. Like it's a very close neighbor. Again, it's detached, it's 2-story. It was built in 1989. So within 1 year of year built. We do note that it has 1 extra bedroom. So that might be something that you'll take into consideration when you are pricing. And we can see that it sold for $505. Now, what will become really useful in short time is we'll actually link this link to a sold listing page where you'll be able to get all of the photos. We don't have that built just yet, but we do have a solution to it. So just jumping over to, I'm going to come back to the screen. I just want to show you how you would get more details on this 319 Woodbrook Mews. For any property that is sold on the MLS in the last 10 years in Alberta, you can simply type in the address here. Google again will auto predict it, and we can get a little bit more details about the sale. We can see that this home sold in May 2019. The list price was $519,900. It sold for 97% of the listed price at $505,000. So, as I mentioned, as soon as you start listing, we will also send you a bespoke data set so that you can kind of dig into more details on each of these listings. So here, 319 Woodbrook Mews, you will have received an email from us with all of the data that might be relevant. So if we just find that listing, we can see it here. We know it's a close proximity. We know that on paper, it's a very similar home, with the exception of having one extra bedroom and maybe basement development varies. But now you have all the photos to flip through, and you can compare your subject property to this comparable. Maybe you've had a more recent kitchen renovation, or maybe an addition. So these are all things that you would make adjustments for as you contemplate your value in relation to the sold comparables. So as Alan, spoke about earlier, you want to compare not only value as it pertains to sold listings, but also what are you competing against, right? What other options do buyers have in the marketplace right now? And so if you scroll down on the comparables page just a little bit further, we have a solution for that as well. So we then show you live listings, and you'll see here that the matches are not perfect. They start at 75%, and you can load a ton more results, but you really want to focus on the ones that are most comparable to your subject property. So the reason we're not seeing a really high match score here is simply because we don't have that much inventory. In all my years of selling, I've not seen months of supply so low. I think we're at 1.2 or 1.3 months of supply for detached homes, which is super low. So in a more balanced market with more inventory, you will see more comparable live listings. So the beauty about this part of the page is that now you're trying to determine, again, where your value rests, and you can very easily click into one of these. And when you do that, it will open the listing page for that active listing. So now you can say, okay, this is my competition on the market. This home is listed at $559,800. And now I can flip through all the photos and again, make that comparative market analysis on how this active listing compares to my future offering. Another cool thing about our listing pages, if there is MLS history in the past 10 years, you will find that here. This will only show up if you're in a logged in state. We can't have it public facing, but as soon as you're logged in, you can see any MLS history, and we can see that this home sold for $514,000 in 2015. So they're priced a little bit higher than what they were at that time.
Yeah, I like the point you always make on this, Jeff, that if a buyer is going to be considering the subject property that we were talking about, then for sure they're also going to take a look at this one and any others that are nearby. So it really is for the buyers considering the subject home, they're going to look at this, and it's going to become a comparison exercise of which of these homes is offering more value for the price that they're listed for.
Yeah, fully agree. I think it's a very reasonable assumption that if our subject property, our case study example today, was on the market today, I think a buyer would probably look at this home and the subject property. As I'm looking at this, I'm just realizing, your biggest factor about value was location. So, you look at this house and it's kind of backing onto 130th Avenue and Stony Trail. So, obviously that's a major consideration. This is probably a very loud backyard, and that will affect property value. And perhaps this home would have sold if not for this. But that's where you'd have to make that determination. And there's no hard science. Often we get asked, well, I have a triple garage and my comparable has two. How do I make that adjustment? And you can find a ton online. I think that it varies a lot by market. The one that comes up most often would be, well, how do you value a finished basement? And it's, the number that's most often talked about is 25,000 if your basement is finished. Now, you got to take that with a grain of salt, because that could be me down there on the weekends just throwing up sheets of drywall, right? That could qualify as a finished basement. Or you could have a professional come in and do a full man cave with theater and wet bar and steam shower. And so in general, you'll be able to find those numbers to adjust for, but it's not a perfect science for sure. Alan, do you think there's anything else worth going over here on the data tools, or anything else that we should cover?
I think that was a great example. Maybe just to follow up on your point there about the value of a finished basement. It's, you can, to your point, the $25,000 number. That's a kind of rule of thumb benchmark that's useful. But like you were saying, if the home next door to you is currently listed and it has a finished basement and they're listed at a lower price than you, well then that's just the reality of your selling environment. So are you going to be able to get $25,000 more for your finished basement? Maybe not. Depends on your active competition.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just another reminder, this is where you access all of that data. We continue to improve these tools every week or two. It's typically up to date within the last 3 days. So if you're out driving around and you see a sold sticker on one of your neighbor's properties, if it just happened that day, you might not get the data, but usually within 2 or 3 days, we have that record on our site. And this is the transparency that we've worked really hard to bring to the public. And we think that the public deserves to have this information. And, we are on the side of the courts with that. So yeah, maybe I'll throw over to Lindsay and find out how things are going in the Q&A section, if there's anything that we can address.
There haven't been questions flooding in, but maybe it's because I've been typing too much. So feel free to put any questions you have over here in the Q&A tab of your screen on the left-hand side, second item down, if you have any questions specifically you would like either Jeff or Alan or the Jeff and Alan show to answer.
Yeah, happy to help any way we can. So one thing that we're going to do after the webinar ends is, everyone on the call will receive an email. And what we'd like to do is just offer, a 15-minute call so that we can talk about your particular property and kind of really zero in on those comparables that you might be considering as you think of value. From a regulatory perspective, we are very careful to not be seen as giving advice, but we can provide all of the data related to your property sale. And by doing so, we can really guide all of our sellers in the right direction.
Perhaps Jeff and Alan, would you like to touch on potential savings? So the opportunity to make the most amount of money when you are selling your home, either the traditional way or yourself?
Yeah, that's a great thing to cover. So what we've tried to do is make it very risk-free for people to work with us. And so in that regard, it's risk-free to try working with Bōde upfront. So we look after the cost of photographs and professional measurements. We then list your property across a ton of listing sites. Of course, Bōde, Kijiji, and Zillow, and the big one, Realtor.ca. And the thing that we do that's quite different from other, call it brokerages or agents, is that we then go about creating digital listing advertisements for every listing that we have. So hopefully for people that have been on the call that are scrolling Facebook and Instagram in the evening, you'll see these property ads. Now, the call to action on there is to get people to schedule viewings or engage directly with our sellers. And that's been quite effective. So in terms of fee, we earn a 1% fee only upon success. So once you've sold, we earn a 1% fee, but all of the upfront costs we cover and we eat those costs. The thing that's quite different about our model as well is that we give our sellers the best opportunity to attract a self-represented buyer. So we're the first online marketplace where a seller without agent representation and a buyer without agent representation can negotiate all online and ultimately fill out a legally binding, digitally signed contract that you can take to your lawyer to close the deal. So, you know, we don't prevent agents from working with us, and it's really up to our sellers as to how much buy-side commission they want to offer, if they want to offer a buy-side commission. But what we're doing that's very different is that we're giving you the best shot of of attracting a self-represented buyer.
Yeah, I think that's one thing you touched on there, Jeff, that's maybe important to clarify is that another thing that's quite different about what we do at Bōde is we give sellers the freedom to choose how much buy-side commission they want to offer. So normally, if you were working with a traditional realtor, they will more or less insist that you offer 3.5% on the first $100,000 and 1.5% on anything above that as a buy-side commission to attract a buyer who's working with a realtor. With us, you can literally offer any amount you want, and we've had some sellers who've been successful offering less than that amount for a buy-side commission, which means that they're not only now saving on our fees, which are lower than traditional realtor, but they're also saving on the buy-side commission fees. And again, to your point, if they sell to a buyer who doesn't have a realtor, well, then actually they're saving all of those fees on the buy side as well. So somewhere between 25% to 75% less commission selling with Bōde, depending on whether the buyer you sell to has a realtor or not.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it just makes for such a much more efficient transaction, especially, you know, and the buyer might expect it if they come self-represented, you know, it's a win-win. The seller can save a little bit and the buyer can save a little bit.
We have a couple of questions flooding in here. So does Bōde supply the necessary contracts? What is the process once a buyer has been found?
Yeah, so I guess I'm still sharing my screen. So why don't I just show real quickly what that looks like. So what's quite different about our listing pages is these buttons here. So here you can directly message. I'll actually go to one of our listings. So you can go to the search page. We'll find one of my favorite listings currently in Altador. This is one that we put on a couple weeks ago. Now this is a $1.25 million semi-detached property in the community of Altador. And what's different about our listing pages is that you actually engage directly with the seller. And so we're removing the middleman from this process. So Christopher is selling their home. Here you can see his phone number. You can call or text him. You can also message him directly from the listing page. So there's a chat function there. Maybe you want to ask, you know, the typical questions that get asked when you're interested in a property, you know, what are the average utilities? Or maybe you want to ask, hey, Chris, like, what's your ideal possession date? What works best for you? So you can use the messaging tool for that. The book a viewing button, I know I'm a bit off tangent. I'll try to come back to the question. I have my ADD kicking in. So book a viewing, you know, you could say, this is much like the open table experience if you've used that to book a restaurant reservation. So you can say, you know, I want to view the property on Saturday the 24th at 3:30 p.m. And as we always do, we try to empower our sellers. We allow you to choose what times are available. So if you don't want showings, maybe you have young kids, you don't want showings after 7 p.m., you simply X those times out and that option is not available for booking. So finally, long-winded, coming around to the actual question, how do you make an offer? So for buyers that are represented, often their agents will continue to work in the way that they are very familiar, which is a DocuSigned or AuthentiSigned PDF that we direct that agent to email it directly to our seller. The other way that it can be done is simply by clicking this Make an Offer button. The first thing we do is ask if you're a buyer or if you're an agent representing a buyer, and then it takes you right into the flow. So the way real estate transactions are typically conducted is buyer presents a written offer to seller, and then that offer gets thrown on a table somewhere and forgotten about. And then it's text messages and phone calls and emails through the negotiating process. So that step of putting it in writing before agreement is really kind of redundant. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So the way our system works is as soon as you say, make an offer, you can add a person. So if you have a husband, wife, or partner that's going to be on title with you, you can add their first name, last name, and email, and now they're part of this flow. Just for the purposes of this example, we'll just hit continue. We can see what is the offer amount. So it pre-populates the list price. Maybe I want to offer 10,000 less. We give them the buyers the opportunity to look at comparables and get pre-approved. And then we really walk them through the entire negotiating process. As soon as that gets sent to the seller can choose to accept the offer, reject it, and then what most likely happens is the seller is going to counter it. So what's really nice about that process is they can choose which aspects of the offer to counter. So maybe everything is acceptable. You know, the included goods, the refrigerator, washer, dryer, window coverings, that's all fine. You know, the possession date, end of June, that works great for me. I'm just going to hit accept, and maybe I'm going to counter on price. Now, that goes back and forth until both parties have agreed. Then we take you into the contract signing module. And what comes of that is a fully binding legally contract that we package up for you and you can take to your lawyer.
Awesome. Looks like we've got a few more questions here, Jeff. I'm just going to read them out to you. So one from Barbara. It says, how long does it take from starting to list to get your photos and measurements done and ultimately get listed?
Yeah, great question. So we are in a pretty busy seasonal market right now. Our team works very, very quickly. We can turn things around very fast. The thing that is a bit of a bottleneck are those photos and measurements. So in a typical balanced market, you know, call it 4 months of supply and things are very balanced, we can usually turn those around in about 2 business days. Right now, we work with a number of providers, but it is taking a little bit longer. So if you want to be on market, say Friday for the weekend, we would suggest, you know, best case scenario, get those up front. If your home's ready to be photographed, if it hasn't snowed like it did this morning, you know, the weather's good, just get those done. Again, we pay for those. As soon as they're ready, they're in your account, and then you have the opportunity to choose when to go to market. As soon as those photos and measurements are done, we can usually turn it around in about 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, depending on the amount of review that's required. And at that point, you're then listed on Bōde, Realtor.ca, and all of the listing platforms. So the absolute, if you need photos and measurements, and we really recommend professional photographs, and the measurements are not really a negotiable with the Real Estate Council's residential measurement standards. We need these to be done by professionals because buyers do rely on that information, and it's for our own sellers' protection that those measurements are provided and it's done by a professional who actually insures them, right? So if that property ends up being off more than 2%, you know, there's actual legal recourse by getting professional measurements. So as early as possible, if you start the listing process 1 week in advance, you can expect to be on the market for sure with all your photos and measurements, you know, within 7 days.
Great. Another question here, this time from Catherine. She says, when creating my listing and looking at comparables, do I consider the square footage of my home with just the above grade amount, or do I include the walkout lower level?
So all properties in Alberta are measured above grade. So whenever we talk about square footage, we always contemplate above grade. Now, she raises an interesting point about the walkout, right? So again, you know, a finished basement might be valued, as we talked about, $25,000, but now you've got another superior feature to most of your comparables. So how much do you value that walkout? Is it $40,000 or is it $50,000? It very well could be. Of course, you have to look at location. That's going to be, you know, a walkout in one community is going to be valued very different from a walkout in another community. I forget the question. Did that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. It's about whether considering the square footage above grade or including the walkout lower level.
Yeah, so everything you see will always just contemplate above grade
Yeah.
square footage. Yeah.
Probably worth mentioning there as well that you'll get the official square footage from your measurements provider, right, Jeff?
Yeah, exactly. So the measurements, they have changed a lot over the last few years. It drives me a little bit nuts, but you can measure detached properties from the exterior at the foundation. Literally, you could take a string and so the reason it drives me crazy is that when you look at the square footage of a detached house, it's not comparing apples to apples of a semi-detached house or a townhouse, because those types of properties are measured what's called paint to paint. So it might not seem like a big deal, but it does change the size by about 10 to 15%. So if you had a 2x6 exterior wall, the detached home is getting credit for it. The attached home, even if it only is attached by one party wall, is actually going to lose that. And over the course of a 50-foot by 20-foot perimeter, that 2 or 3 inches of wall thickness does make a difference. So it's I hope one day we'll get to a standard where every property is simply measured paint to paint, usable square footage, and by that I consider somewhere where I can put my foot and walk, usable square footage, so that we are, comparing apples to apples across the board. I think we'll get there, but it will take some more time.
One quick question here from Terry asking, what is a walkout basement?
Yeah, so just any basement that you can walk out of. So it's has a door in the basement, and typically the grade of the front of the home is quite a bit higher than the grade at the back of the home. So you might be able to drive straight into an attached garage, but on the back of the home, the grade, it's on a hill, so you can walk straight out onto your backyard.
Okay, another one here about photos and measurements again. Does Bōde organize the photos and measurements, or do we arrange that ourselves with the contact Bōde gives us?
Yeah, great question. So as part of the listing flow, as you start that process, you'll get down to a part where it says photos and measurements. In Edmonton and Calgary, we have a preferred provider, and it will take you directly into a scheduling tool so that you can schedule a time that's convenient for you with our providers.
Awesome. Another question here. In this hot market, what is the average buy-side commission your clients are offering? And do you find that realtors avoid showing a home that's listed with Bōde or that's not offering enough commission?
So the typical commission hasn't changed ever since I started, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because the typical buy-side commission, and we'd expect to see this on about 95% of listings on the MLS, is 3.5% on the first 100,000 and 1.5% on the balance. And the reason I say that that's kind of wild that it hasn't changed even, in the last 15 years, is that property values have done a lot, right? So I look at the first apartment that I bought. I think I was 21. I bought it for 134,000. And if you think about that 3.5, 1.5 value on that property value, my agent earned about, I was not licensed at the time, my agent earned about $4,000, which seemed like a pretty good amount of money, given she drove me around to a bunch of places, sat with the seller at the kitchen table and negotiated. That condo now is worth $300,000. So the buy-side commission is over $10,000. And all the while, technology has made things way easier on agents and has given buyers way more opportunity to do more of the work themselves. So they can search realtor.ca and determine which homes are of interest. And the agents have, apps on their phone that open lockboxes, and they have, tools like DocuSign and AuthentiSign. They're no longer sitting, across the kitchen table with the sellers. It's all just done digitally. So the workload has gone way down, but the commissions earned has gone way up. So your question about do agents avoid showing Bōde listings? When we first started, it was a real concern that would be the case, and I think it'd be ignorant to suggest that never happens, right? I think that there are unethical agents that, even though they know a property is the right fit for their buyer, they will try to skirt showing it. But coming back to what I just said, buyers are driving this process. right? This isn't like back in the 70s when, you know, realtors got sheets of properties and said, oh, I'm going to match make, and I think this one would be good for Alan, and I think this one would be good for Lindsay. That's not happening at all. Buyers are doing all their due diligence. So again, you know, coming back to this listing we just looked at, you know, the agent is not saying, hey, buyer, I think we should go look at this really beautiful home on Kiwanis Park in Altadore. It's the buyer saying, hey, I really want to see that. And now it's on the agent to make an excuse to not. And really, you know, that's the unethical behavior. So yeah, we're definitely aware of of that stigma, but we haven't really seen it be an issue because buyers are driving the bus.
Yeah, and I'd maybe just to add to that, in most cases, our sellers are still offering a commission. We have had some sellers who are offered no buy-side commission, and then it has to be a negotiation when the deal gets done. If there is a realtor, who's going to pay the realtor and how much. So we have had some sellers offer no commission, but the vast majority of our sellers offer some commission. And the question also asked about, you know, what's the average buy-side commission our clients would offer? I would say there's a huge range there. I would say maybe average would be 3% on the first 100,000 and 1% on everything above that, compared to what Jeff just said is typical there, the 3.5 and 1.5. So that can be significant, you know, thousands of dollars of savings by offering even just a small decrease in that buy-side commission percentage. And then in that case, you know, a buy-side realtor is left with the choice of, well, am I really going to, you know, steer my client away from this home over a few $1,000s when they're still making, you know, decent commission on that home.
The other thing I'd say about the buy-side commissions is just to always look at it in reference to the strength of the offer, right? So, you know, we had a Lake Bonavista Vista listing a few months ago, and the seller said, yeah, you know, I'm not willing to offer a buy-side commission. So it literally went on. We can't put zero, so it was a $1 commission, and you know, they found a buyer right away that loved the home, and they went in, and he simply said, well, you know, I priced it based on no buy-side commission being offered. So effectively, the list price was not $550, it was $559 or $561 if the agent was insisting on a buy-side commission. And the agent in that scenario said, yeah, my client loves the home, no problem at all. They went in, they wrote the buy-side commission at 3.5, 1.5, and the offer came in $11,000 over list. So net to the seller, it was still the same. Now, I wouldn't advise that to be like a recommended course, but what I would say is if you are offering a commission, you know, build it into your list price. And if it's not, you know, a full commission, let's say it's a flat rate of $5,000, then, you know, look at that commission in concert with the other aspects of the offer. And that's not just price, you know, that's included goods, that's timing. Is it the exact possession date you want? You know, how is it related to your list price? So yeah, look at those things kind of coupled together, I think is the best advice.
Yeah. And I guess maybe the last thought on that is the beauty of our service is that it's fully in your control. You get to choose what buy-side commission you want to offer, which is not something that people in Alberta have ever really had the opportunity to do before.
Yeah, all part of the listing flow. So as you get through, you can choose a typical 3.5 and 1.5, or you can choose a custom commission, which we think that every homeowner deserves that ability.
Okay, so we're running out of time here, but maybe just one more question quickly. So the question's from Sandy, and she asks, in smaller communities, where would you find a measurement professional? And if not available, what do you do then?
So we can help with that. We have one group within Alberta that travels a lot for us. There's often a small travel fee. Up to now, we typically, unless it's really, really remote, but we've listed stuff in Crow's Nest Pass, and I think we had one come up the other day in a place I'd never heard of called 7 Persons. So we can help with that. So if you are in a remote or rural area, just let us know. We will shake the tree and find someone that can help with this process.
Great. Let's wrap up there. Jeff, any final remarks?
Nope. Just a reminder that everyone on the call will receive an email. Would love to chat with you. We'll have blocks of time available, and you can simply schedule a time anytime that works for your schedule.
Yeah, from my side, thanks everyone for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll be doing more of these sessions in the future, so keep an eye out on your inbox to see those, and keep an eye out also for that follow-up email to book a session with Jeff. So thanks everyone, and see you all soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.